The Cessna 172 lurched violently as two F-16s ripped past, their jet wash nearly flipping the tiny plane. Jessica gritted her teeth, blonde hair whipping in the turbulence, knuckles white against the yoke. Below, Nellis Air Force Base sprawled. Like a scar across the Nevada desert. Unidentified aircraft, land now or we'll take you down. Before she could answer, the underbelly of an F-16 filled her windscreen, close enough to count the rivets. The message was clear: land or die. 20 minutes later, she was on her knees on the scorching tarmac, hands locked behind her head, surrounded by armed security personnel. Colonel Marcus Reynolds leaned down, eyes blazing with authority and barely contained rage. "Who the hell do you think you are? You could have been a terrorist?" Jessica didn't speak. She didn't even blink, because they saw a reckless intruder, but they missed the truth entirely. She had built what they now feared most, and now they had just given her a stage. Her name was Jessica Parker, and she looked exactly like someone you might pass at a grocery store without a second glance. 35 years old, with wheat blonde hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore a faded leather flight jacket that had seen better days. The name patch was so worn you could barely make out Parker stitched in gold thread. Her jeans were practical, her boots scuffed, and she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. But if you looked closer, really looked, you'd notice things. The way she walked with military precision despite her civilian clothes. How her gray-blue eyes seemed to catalog every exit, every person, every potential threat without moving her head. The slight favor she gave her right leg, evidence of an old injury that never quite healed. Around her neck, barely visible beneath. Her collar hung a simple silver chain with what looked like a piece of twisted metal. Not jewelry, but shrapnel, polished smooth by years of unconscious touching. She lived alone in a cabin 20 miles outside Beatty, Nevada, where the desert stretched endlessly in every direction. Her nearest neighbor was 7 miles away, which suited her perfectly. The cabin was sparse but clean, with one notable exception, a wall covered in aviation charts. Not current ones, but charts from a decade ago, marked with routes and notations in pencil that had faded but never been erased. On the simple wooden desk sat a single photograph in a cracked frame, a woman in an Air Force flight suit grinning, beside an F-22 Raptor, her eyes bright with purpose and pride. That woman looked like Jessica Parker, but also nothing like her. That woman hadn't yet learned that doing the right thing could cost you everything. Colonel Reynolds was enjoying himself. He'd been base security commander for 3 years, and in that time he'd developed a reputation for iron discipline and zero tolerance. The woman kneeling before him was exactly the kind of situation he lived for, a chance to demonstrate his authority, to show the 200 airmen watching that security was no joke. "You know what I think?" he said, circling her like a predator. "I think you're either a spy or just another delusional civilian who thinks the rules don't apply to her." "Which is it?" Jessica remained silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. This seemed to enrage Reynolds further. "Answer me when I'm talking to you." He grabbed her shoulder, yanking her around. "You think you're special? You think that piece of junk you fly makes you a pilot?" Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Hayes, the air traffic controller who'd vectored in the F-16s, stepped forward. "Sir, she's not talking." "Want me to call psychiatric?" Hayes smirked. "Probably some wannabe pilot who learned to fly from YouTube videos. They all think they're heroes until reality hits." The crowd of airmen chuckled nervously. Some looked uncomfortable, but none were willing to speak up against their superiors. Master Sergeant Derek Coleman, head of base security, decided to pile on. "Ma'am, I'm going to search your aircraft now, and when I find whatever anti-government, manifesto, or conspiracy theory nonsense you're carrying, we're going to add domestic terrorism to your charges." They brought her personal effects from the plane in a canvas bag, dumping them unceremoniously on the tarmac. Coleman pawed through them with theatrical disgust. "Look at this," he announced, holding up the framed photograph. "She's got pictures of military aircraft, probably some stolen Valor case." He tossed the photo aside, the frame cracking further on impact. And what's this? He'd found her logbook, filled with careful notations of every flight for the past 10 years. Jesus, look at these flight hours. Lady, did you steal this from a real pilot? Major Brian Foster, commander of the F-16 squadron that had intercepted her, strutted over in his flight suit, still wearing his helmet. My boys could have splashed. You in a heartbeat? He said, loud enough for everyone to hear. You're lucky we have rules about not shooting down crazy civilians, though honestly, sometimes I wonder if we're too soft. The humiliation escalated methodically, each officer trying to outdo the last. Hayes pulled up Jessica's flight plan on her tablet, mocking the careful calculations. Oh look, she even tried to file properly. Probably copied it from a real pilot's. Work. The sun beat down mercilessly, the tarmac radiating heat like an oven. Jessica's knees ached against the concrete, her hands going numb behind her head. But she remained silent, even as Reynolds continued his tirade about civilians who didn't know their place. It was Reynolds who delivered the cruelest blow. He'd found her wallet, pulling out her driver's license with theatrical flair. Jessica Parker, age 35. No military ID, no credentials, nothing. Just another nobody who thought she could play pilot. He turned to the crowd, his voice rising with righteous indignation. You know what pisses me off most? The disrespect. Men and women train for years to earn the right to fly in this airspace. They sacrifice, they bleed, they die for that privilege. And you, he jabbed a finger at Jessica, you just thought you could waltz in here like you own the place. Coleman found her emergency supplies. Basic medical equipment, water, flares. Prepared for everything except common sense, he announced to more nervous laughter. Foster kicked at her aircraft's tires. This thing belongs in a museum, not in the air. How many regulations is she violating just by flying this death trap? The young airmen laughed nervously, some looking uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. Jessica could see it in their faces, the doubt creeping in, the questions about whether this was right. But military discipline held them silent. Reynolds wasn't finished. This is what happens when civilians forget their place, when they think they're equal to warriors. He gestured to her weathered appearance, her simple clothes. Look at her. She's nothing. A nobody trying to play in our world. That's when something shifted in Jessica's expression. Not anger, something deeper. Something that had been building for 10 years of silence, 10 years of carrying a weight that would have crushed lesser souls. She thought of Emma, always Emma, and the drawing that had been clutched in small hands during the accident. A picture of an angel with airplane wings. She thought of 47 children who never got to grow up because someone else had followed. Orders without question. She thought of how she'd been erased from existence, stripped of everything she'd worked for, blamed for having a conscience in a world that rewarded blind obedience. "Colonel Reynolds," Jessica finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly across the silent tarmac. "I need to make a phone call." The colonel barked a laugh. "A call? To your lawyer? Your husband?" "Sorry, sweetheart, but you're not calling anyone until—" "To NORAD," Jessica continued, still quiet but with steel underneath. "Authentication code, Ghost Eagle 77734. The laughter died instantly. Hayes went pale, her tablet clattering to the ground. That's an ultra-clearance code," she whispered. "Only 12 people in the entire country have those codes." Coleman's hand froze halfway to his weapon. Foster took an involuntary step back. Only Reynolds, too caught up in his own authority, failed to recognize what had just happened. "What kind of joke—" "Sir," Hayes interrupted, her voice shaking. "Those codes, they're real. They're for personnel with knowledge so classified that—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jessica slowly lowered her hands and stood, her movements careful and deliberate. For the first time, she looked Reynolds directly in the eye. "Colonel, I've been very patient, but now I need that phone call." Coleman was already on his radio, his voice shaking. "Control, we need immediate verification on a Ghost Eagle authentication code." The response was instant and panicked. "All units stand down." Repeat, all units stand down immediately. The base's emergency screens used for alerts and briefings suddenly flickered to life. General Patricia Williams, Air Combat Command's highest-ranking officer, appeared on the screen. Her expression cycled through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been pain. My God, Jessica Parker. The silence was deafening. 200 airmen stood frozen, watching their reality crumble. William's voice carried across the tarmac, each word dropping like a bomb. Colonel Reynolds, are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea who you just arrested? Reynolds tried to speak, but only managed to croak. Williams continued, her voice rising. That woman designed half the security protocols you claim she violated. She wrote the book on restricted airspace management. The general caught herself, then continued more carefully. Colonel Parker has ultra clearance because she possesses knowledge vital to national security, knowledge she's kept silent about for 10 years, despite having every reason to speak. But she's... Reynolds gestured helplessly at Jessica's civilian clothes, her battered aircraft. She's not in the system. She's not military. She's not in the system, Williams said slowly, because we erased her from it. My predecessor made sure of that when he needed someone to blame for his own catastrophic failure. The truth began to unfold like a nightmare in reverse, each revelation more devastating than the last. Jessica Parker refused to murder 47 children in Syria, Williams continued, her voice growing harder with each word. She was court-martialed for having a conscience, and while she sat in detention for doing the right thing, her 5-year-old daughter died in a car accident. Hayes found her voice barely audible. The Syrian school bombing. That was you. You're the pilot who refused the order. Jessica neither confirmed nor denied, simply stood there with quiet dignity despite everything. She'd endured. Williams wasn't finished, and Reynolds, that medical supply run she was flying? It's for the Veterans Administration Clinic at Indian Springs, specifically for the burn unit that treats pilots injured in training accidents. She's been flying those runs for free for 8 years, flying medical supplies to veterans in that piece of junk because she believes in service, even after we destroyed her life for it. Foster removed his helmet, his face stricken. Ma'am, We didn't know. Of course you didn't, Jessica finally spoke, her voice calm and without accusation. That was the point. The weight of realization settled over the assembled personnel like a suffocating blanket. They had humiliated a woman who had sacrificed everything rather than compromise her principles. They had mocked someone who continued to serve those who had destroyed her. Coleman stepped forward, his hands shaking as he began carefully placing Jessica's belongings back in the bag, treating them like religious artifacts. When he reached the cracked photograph, he hesitated. Ma'am, I can have this reframed. Please. Jessica took it gently, tracing the crack with one finger. Some things are meant to stay broken, Sergeant. They remind us of the cost of fixing. What shouldn't have been broken in the first place. The transformation was complete. The woman they had dismissed as a nobody had revealed herself to be someone whose actions had shaped the very policies they enforced. Someone who had paid the ultimate price for refusing to compromise her conscience. Reynolds, the man who had built his career on absolute authority, fell to his knees. Colonel Parker, Please, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Jessica Parker, who had lost everything for refusing to kneel to power, gently touched Reynolds' shoulder. Stand up, Colonel. Kneeling. Solves nothing. You did your job as you understood it. She looked around at the assembled airmen, these young faces who had just learned that sometimes the enemy of protocol is conscience. You want to honor me? Honor those 47 children by remembering that every order, every mission, every decision has human cost. Remember that rank doesn't determine righteousness, and remember that sometimes the hardest thing to do is nothing at all. Hayes approached with tears streaming down her face. The children in Syria? Did you know? Before the strike? I saw them through my sensors, Jessica said simply. Playing, learning, being children, just like Emma was. Her hand went to the metal, fragment at her throat, just like Emma was. The F-16 pilots who had forced her down stood in formation, their flight suits dark with sweat. Foster spoke for them all. "Ma'am, we'd like to escort you out. Honor guard formation. It's the least we can do." Jessica shook her head. "I don't need an escort, Major. I haven't needed one for 10 years. She walked back to her battered Cessna, where ground crew were already frantically trying to remove the word intruder they'd spray-painted on the fuselage. She ran her hand along the aircraft's skin like greeting an old friend. Besides, I have medical supplies to deliver. Veterans are waiting. As she performed her pre-flight check, Reynolds found the courage to approach one last time. "Colonel Parker, what you did in Syria, refusing that order, I have to ask, was it worth it? Everything you lost?" Jessica paused in her inspection, considering. Then she smiled the saddest smile Reynolds had ever seen. "Colonel, I dream about those 47 children every night, but in my dreams, they're alive. They're playing, learning, growing up. In my dreams, they get to become doctors, teachers, parents. That's worth any price." She climbed into the cockpit, the old leather seat conforming to her shape like a glove. "And Emma?" Emma knew her mother tried to save them. She knew that before. She died. That's the only medal I need. The Cessna's engine coughed to life, settling into its familiar rhythm. As Jessica taxied toward the runway, every person on that tarmac, from the newest airman to Colonel Reynolds himself, rendered a perfect salute. She didn't acknowledge it, didn't need to, but those closest could see her lips moving in what might have been a prayer, or might have been 47 names recited like a rosary of regret and resolve. The tower controller, a young woman who had been silent throughout the entire incident, keyed her microphone. "Cessna 734, you are cleared for immediate departure. Any heading, any altitude. And ma'am, Ghost Eagle 1, the skies are yours. They always have been." Jessica Parker flew west into the setting sun, her battered aircraft carrying medicine to those who needed it, just as she'd done every week for 8 years. Behind her, Nellis Air Force Base slowly returned to normal operations, though nothing would ever be quite the same. Young airmen would tell this story in barracks and ready rooms, each time adding their own understanding of what they'd witnessed. How a woman who'd lost everything chose service over bitterness, how she'd been destroyed for her conscience and still returned to help those who had destroyed her. How real courage sometimes looks like a tired woman in an old airplane, flying. Medical supplies across the desert, asking for nothing in return. Colonel Reynolds stood on the tarmac long after the Cessna disappeared, thinking about the choices that define us, about the difference between following orders and following conscience, about how sometimes the greatest victory comes not from wielding power, but from knowing when not to use it. Some battles are won not with power, but with dignity. Jessica Parker had won hers the moment she chose 47 Syrian children over her career, her freedom, her future. She'd won it again every day for 10 years as she flew supplies to veterans while wearing the fragment of her daughter's car seat against her heart. And she'd won it today by refusing to let humiliation turn her into something less than she was. The question that lingered in the desert air, the question that would haunt Colonel Reynolds and every witness to that day, was simple. If you were her, carrying all that pain, all that loss, all that injustice, would you forgive? Would you serve those who'd wronged you? Would you choose dignity over revenge? Jessica Parker had made her choice 10 years ago in Syrian airspace, and she'd never stopped making it. Every flight, every delivery, every silent mile across the desert was her answer. 3 months later, Reynolds requested a transfer to a veterans hospital, where he spent his remaining years in the Air Force working with wounded warriors. Hayes left active duty to become a flight instructor, teaching young pilots that technology must always serve humanity, never the reverse. Foster founded a scholarship program for children of military families who had lost parents in service. They all carried the lesson Jessica Parker had taught them, that true strength isn't found in the power to destroy, but in the courage to create, to heal, to serve, even when the world offers you every reason to become something harder, colder, less human. The Cessna continued its weekly flights, a ghost in the desert carrying hope to those who needed it most. And sometimes, on clear days when the sun struck the windscreen just right, ground controllers would swear they could see an angel with airplane wings, reminding them that some battles are won not with weapons, but with the quiet determination to remain human in a world that rewards machinery. In the end, Jessica Parker's greatest victory wasn't surviving her fall from grace. It was choosing every single day to rise above it. If you were her, would you forgive? The desert knows the answer. It whispers it in every grain of sand, every mile of endless sky. Some people are not broken by injustice. They are refined by it. Jessica Parker was one of those people, and in a world that desperately needed heroes who looked like ordinary people doing extraordinary things, she was exactly what we needed, whether we deserved her or not. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.